Tvach. We're learning as chus for Shlema Filan Chaya Baserach. We are on Daf Tzadi Hey Amid Beis by the Mishnah. Achas, about 8 lines from the top. Achas shtei halechem v'achas lechem haponim. Both the shtei halechem that's brought on Shavuos and the lechem haponim that comes every Shabbos. The shasan v'arichasan b'chutz. They are what do you call it? They are kneaded and they are prepared. They're formed outside of the Beis Hamikdash. V'afiyasam b'fnim, and their baking happens inside the Beis Hamikdash. So there's a different Rishonim have different opinions about what the reason is. One is because the just the oven was the klisharis and not the midas that we used for the dough. So it first becomes possible b'yaitza after baking, by baking. Yeah. Sagt the Gemara, sagt the Rashi, sagt the Mishnah weiter. Ve'einen doiches as a Shabbos. The Gemara is going to talk about this more. Ve'einen doiches as a Shabbos. It's not doiches Shabbos. That this has to be done before Shabbos. This is going to present an obvious problem. If you have to bake it in the Azara, which the Gemara is going to ask, how could you, if it's not doiches Shabbos, how could you bake anything the day before and make a Kaddish, Kedushas Aguf? You're going to have a Lina problem. It's going to be Lina. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer Kol Maseyim B'fnim. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, everything was done B'fnim, both the Lisha and the Aricha, as well as the Afiyah, was all done in the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Shimon Aimer, let them have your Agad Loimer. They always used this. You should remind yourself to say exactly the opposite of Rabbi Yehuda. Shtei Lechem Lechem Apanim Ksheris Ba'azara Ksheris Beis Pagi. They're kosher to be brought in the Azara, but they could also be prepared. They could be prepared in the Azara, but they could also be prepared outside of the Azara up to Beis Pagi, which we've had before. That was the outermost limit of Yerushalayim. So the Mishnah's sequence makes it harder to understand, but essentially the range of opinion starts from Reb Shimon, who says everything has to be in the Azara. Then you have the Tanakama, who says the kneading and the everything before baking should be done. It can be done outside, and the baking has to be done inside. And then you have Rabbi Yehuda says everything could be done outside in Yerushalayim. Now we go back to the kasha we had mentioned before. The Gemara goes back to the question on the first part of the Mishnah. Haguva kasha. Amrit lishasam arichasan b'chutz. We said that the kneading and the forming of the lechem apanim and the shtei lechem is done outside the Beis Hamikdash. Alma midash yavis lein is kasha. So you see that the kli is not makadosh. It's not a kli sharas, that's makadosh. But we say that the baking has to be done b'fnim alma midash yavis nishkacha. That seems to indicate that it was mekadosh before it was baked. Amrava hiksha adam kasha shu kasha kabarzo. Someone who asked this question, someone who himself was a very hard person, meaning who was a very brilliant person, as hard as steel, and Umanu Rav Sheshes. He's the one who asked this question. In fact, my kasha dilma yisaron le mekadosh taner mekadosh. What's the problem? The yisaron, maybe the measuring kli was not mekadosh, but the taner was mekadosh, and that's why you have the distinction. You could do everything up to the baking outside of the azara, but the baking had to be done in the azara because the taner was a kli sharis. So the Gemara says that was never really the kasha. The kasha ha kasha. We say you bake it in the azara. Al mataner makadosh. We said that the taner is not. That means that the taner is not makadosh it. The taner is makadosh it to become kadosh kedushas aguf. But then the Mishnah continued. The Tanakama continued. Vein doiches Shabbos. It's not makadosh. It's not doiches Shabbos. So if belina, like we said, why doesn't it become pasul belina? If the taner is makadosh it, and it's not doiches Shabbos, you have to do it before Shabbos. So you made a kaddish before Shabbos, should become basal. Alama Rava, Hiksha Adam Kasha Shu Kasha Kabazul Manor of Sheshes. And Rava said the person who asked this was Rav Sheshes, who is himself a very brilliant person. Amar Rav Ashi objected. My kusha. What's the kasha? Dilma maimi bifnim b'mokum's reason. Doesn't mean he changes the whole meaning of, or it's certainly not the pashta pshat in the Mishnah. When he say that the afia is bifnim, it doesn't mean physically, geographically bifnim. It means in the place of those who has reason. The bifnim, the place of the kahanim. Meaning the kahanim are the ones who had to do the afia, as opposed to being done by zarim. So it never meant to say there's taka no such rule. Everything is not kaddish until you bring it into the Beis Hamikdash, until you start the avodah with it. It's not kaddish laguf, so you can do it. You can bake it before Shabbos. So Rashi barusahi, but this is incorrect. The Rashi's pshat is not a valid pshat. Manavshach, because how does it work? There's a reason if the afia, the baking has to be done by kehanim lishari chanami beinan's reason. Why shouldn't the rest of the service, rest of the procedures to prepare the mincha, the shei lechem and the lechem upon him, why shouldn't that also have to be done by the kehanim? They should all be the same. What's the reason for distinguishing between them? Ella, the Rasha Berusi. So Rashi's teretz is a Berusa, and we're stuck with our kasha. And Taisa says, El Rashi Berusi, the Tavra Mishasanazu Leishanazu. We have to resort to saying that when the Mishnah said, Lishasam Rechasim B'chutz Aviyasam B'fnim, that's one Tana, and it's a different Tana that says Ve'ein Nedoiches HaShabbos. Because obviously, if you're saying that you have to do the Afiyah B'fnim, it has to be done on Shabbos. It can't be done the day before. Could be possibilina. It would have to be Deichel Shabbos because anything that's required to be done, and you're going to passel the carbon, obviously you have to do it on Shabbos. They do the avodah even on Shabbos. We brought in the machlokes. That was the Tanakama. Rav Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda argued. Rav Yehuda said everything had to be done b'fnim, all the avodas, and Rav Shimon said nothing had to be done b'fnim. They're both coming from the same pasuk. But this is a pasuk in Shmuel, where David HaMelech was tining with the Kayin in Noiv. So there was David HaMelech. Let's read the pasuk. Vayan David es HaKayin vayomer loy. Yeah, David HaMelech had asked the Kayin to provide him with lechem. They were literally starving, and they needed some food. So he asked them to give them the lechem, and they said the lechem is kaddish, so we can't give it to you. He said, first of all, we were not with any women that would make us tamei. If there were women's in either, so it would make them tamei, so they would be possible to eat. That was one of the reasons why they gave him that he shouldn't be able to eat it. But Seisi, and he says also everyone's kalim is kaidish. Then he says, what you're doing anyway, as we're going to have different pshatim in what this means, but he's basically hu derech chayil. Something here is chayil. Something in what you're doing, you kahanim are doing is chayil. Avki hayom yikadish b'kli, and today it's going to become kaddish b'kli. So how do they understand it? So Yehuda Savar b'chayil ashkechinu d'ka'afalei. David HaMelech found them that they were baking on Friday the lechem hapanim for the next day. Amalahu derech chayil kafi salei. He said, "You're baking it b'choil after ayami kaddish b'kli of salei belina. If you're going to be mekadosh it today, you're going to be pasal it belina, so you have to do it on Shabbos." So he held so this is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says everything has to be done b'fnim because Rabbi Yehuda holds. He says there's no distinction between the kneading and the baking. And you see, he learns this pasuk is saying David HaMelech was saying, when you're going to bake it, it's going to become kaddish, and therefore, if you bring the lechem upon him tomorrow, you're going to passel it because it already became kaddish today. Because he holds that the baking was an eklisharis. Rav Shimon Savar, b'Shabbos ashkechinu deka'afulei. Rav Shimon says, no, David HaMelech found the Kehanim in Noiv that they were baking the chalas on Shabbos. Amalhu loy derech chol yisol ne'evdei. Shouldn't you have done it b'choil? Miditana mekadosh shulchan u'de mekadosh. Say you didn't have to bake it today on Shabbos. You should have done it the previous day, and then you would have avoided having to, because you didn't have to bake it on Shabbos, because he holds that the kli is not mekadosh it, so there won't be lina if you make it the day before. Both of these pshatim, they're arguing about which day they found the Kehanim baking. They say, is this really the proper pshat in what David HaMelech, the pasuk doesn't say that he found them baking. So why are we explaining like that? L'chayra, it's not talking about where he found that baking. V'aksiv, v'yitin le'hakoyin kodesh, k'loi ha'yisham lechem. The koyin ended up giving David HaMelech the lechem kodesh, because he didn't have any other lechem, kim lechem upon him. Hamoisim lefnei Hashem. He only had the lechem upon him that had been taken off the shulchan. That means every Shabbos they would take the old lechem upon him off and put the new lechem on. So l'chayru, it's talking about on Shabbos. He's saying that all he had was the lechem upon him that he had just taken off of the shulchan. If it was after Shabbos, that would have already been eaten by the Kehanim. So the Gemara, but the Gemara says if it's talking about, if that's what we're talking about he gave him the lechem that was on the shulchan, that had previously been on the shulchan, that was being prepared for the Kehanim to eat. So what does it mean, derech chol? What was the meaning of that first, right? That we can't understand it the way both of Shimon and Yehuda understood it, so how are we going to understand it? Amali hachak amrlei. Lekach lechem kiyem lechem hapanim hamusarim lefnei Hashem. They said the Kehanim said to David HaMelech, the only lechem we have is the lechem that had been placed on the shulchan. Amlahu, lami bayahai kivin denafik le'mimiila derech choilu. He wanted to say that is relatively choil, that lechem that came off the shulchan, because that is roi for Kehanim to eat. So there's no din me'ila on it. It already lost its din me'ila because it's roi for the king Kehanim to eat. That you could certainly feed that this. You could even give us those that you had just put onto the shulchan that still has a chiyuv mila. They're not, until next Shabbos, they're not going to be mutter to the kehanim. The lecha, you could even give that to eat. Why is that? Mesukenu, because it was a sakana. David HaMelech, like we said, was literally starving. Rashi says Mesukenu she'achsu bomus utnan mi she'achsu bomus machilin say. Someone who is seized by this bulmus, which is what happens with malnourishment, you can feed him until his eyes light up. I feel b'yom haKippurim, b'yuma perak basra. It says that you're allowed to feed someone who's in a pikuach nefashos, and he was in a state of pikuach nefashos. So it was irrelevant how kaddish it was. So Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Shimon, Gemara pligi. So now we've said that this pasuk is not addressing the machlekes of Yehuda and Rav Shimon. So where do they argue about? They argue about halacha l'moshe misina. They each had different messiahs, not halacha l'moshe misina, but what they were told from their rebbeim, what the din was, whether you can whether you have to bake in the azara or not. Dekanami, and I'll prove it to you. The Tanur Shimon Oilam have you rog lechem upanim ksheres ba'azar ksheres abes pagi. It says, instead of saying Rav Shimon Oimer, it says Rav Shimon have you rog loimer. So he said in a lashon that's mashma that it was a messiah, not that it came from a svara or from a pasuk. But tomorrow, shmamina. Okay, now we have a long mishnah. Chavite kayin gadol. We're switching over now from the lechem upon him and the shtei lechem that we discussed in the previous mission. Now we're talking about the chavite kain gadol that he brought every day. That was split into two parts, and we're going to also discuss in this mishnah a regular mincha. So chavite kain gadol ishasam arichasam v'afiyasam b'fnim. This is all done b'fnim. The klisharis that was done in the half midah. The reason why the large klisharis the one Isaron, according to some under Amrim by the Shtei Lechem and the Lechem upon him, why it wasn't Kaddish by the dry measure is because we were scared that someone would put something in it and then take it out. It was used all the time, but this was not very rarely used, so there wasn't that fear. The Doichas is a Shabbos. So it's all done b'fnim and it's Doichas Shabbos. The grinding of the grain into flour, and the sifting it, ain't a Doichas Shabbos. That's not Doichas Shabbos. That you can do before Shabbos. You can't be Doichas Shabbos on something that can be done, even though the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash is Doichas Shabbos. Something that can be done before Shabbos is not Doich. Shabbos and the Shabbos. You have this all the time. This quote from Rabbi Akiva that anything that can be done before Shabbos is not Doichas Shabbos. Shabbos Doichas Shabbos, but if it can't be done beforehand, it is Doichas Shabbos. Then we say Kol Menachos sheyesh bahen ma'aser kli b'fnim, ve'ein bahen ma'aser kli b'chutz. The general rule of Menachos, in addition to the what we just said for the Chavite Kayin Gadol, is that they have to be done in a kli sharis, and then they have to have their kneading and their forming and their baking is all done inside the azara because it's done in a kli sharis. We're going to see in the Gemara a little bit later where this chiv comes from. It's a separate chiv for a regular mincha. Okay, now we're moving on to we've alluded to this exactly what the shape of the lechem hapanim is.
What do we have to say? It has to be done in the azara. Ve'ein behen ma'aser kli b'chutz. Isn't that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Why does it say both of them? Let me see if Rashi says anything or Taisus. I didn't. The truth is, I did not see that Gemara, so I don't know. What is it, the Mishnah? What is the vav? Maybe the Shita says why. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know why it says it in this way. Yeah. Zok the Gemara, Zok the Mishnah. Shtei halechem, the Shtei halechem that was brought on Shavuos, Archan Shiva Tfachim, they were 7 Tfachim long, V'rachvan Dalet Tfachim, the width was 4 Tfachim, B'karnois of Arba, and they had horns sticking out in the corners that were 4 etzbois long. B'karnois of Arba etzbois. Lechem hapanim, the lechem hapanim, and this we have to pay attention to. We're not going to go back to the Shtei halechem, but the lechem hapanim, Archan Yud Tfachim, they were 10 Tfachim long, V'rachvan Hei Tfachim, and the width was 5 Tfachim, the karnois of Sheva etzbois. The karnos sticking out were 7 etzbois long. These karnos, as we're going to see later, that's, if you remember our pictures of how the classic lechem hapanim was like a ches shape, and we had the machlokes that the Gemara is going to bring soon about whether those parts sticking up were 2 Tfachim high or 2.5 Tfachim high. These karnos were on top of that. Or not literally, the Gemara is actually going to say it wasn't on top of it, it was sticking out toward the side. But that was in addition to that. So let's not, just saying this, you shouldn't get confused with this. So the Tanna Kama says that the Lechem HaPanim's length was 10 Tvachim, the width was 5 Tvachim, and these corners sticking out were 7 etzbois. Tita. Rabbi Yehuda says, in order that people shouldn't get confused, we all know from the Seder, Yehuda HaYonosim Behen Simanim, there's another simon he gave, Zadad Yahaz, that the shear of the Shtei Lechem is Zadad, and the shear of the lechem aponim was Yehaz. Ben Zaymo Emer, when the sat al shulchan lechem aponim lefonei tamid. Lechem panim. What is it? What do we learn from lechem panim? Shiulai. So there's two pshatim in Rashi. One is a yulai panim, that it should have a face. That means it should have an area. What does Rashi say? Shiulai panim defanis. It should have walls, like we're going to see. The sides of the lechem panim were bent up 2 or 2.5 tvachim. L'shnachri shiulai pinim zavius. That's what the Maser Sas says it to with an extra yud. Pinim. They should have corners. V'hein hein hakronis. It's referring to the kronis. So Ben Zayim darshans to either learn that you bend up the sides or that you add on the corners. Okay. Hashulchan orcha yud orchavei chamisha. The shulchan where you place the lechem hapanim on was 10 tvachim long and 5 tvachim wide. That sounds great, right? Because we just said that the length and width of the lechem was 10 tvachim long and 5 tvachim wide. But of course, nothing is ever so simple. Lechem aponim, orcha yud urchavei hey. Even the lechem aponim was also a length of 10 and width of 5. Noisen orcha keneged rochbay. But you take the long lechem aponim and you face it sideways, that its length is opposite the width of the shulchan. So obviously, if it's 10 long and it's going on a 5 wide table, 5 tvachim are sticking out. You bend up 2.5 on each end to get that ches shape that we're familiar with. So it turns out that the length fills the width of the shulchan. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yehuda's shita. Ramei Omer, Hashulchan Archa Yud Beis Uruchavai Vav. The shulchan was 12 long and 6 wide. So lechem aponim orcha yud, and the length of the lechem aponim was yud. So he agrees about that it was done in the same direction. Urchavei hey, the width was 5. Nois and orcha keneged rochvei shel shulchan, and you put the length. Everyone agrees the size of the lechem was 10 tvachim long. So you put it against the 6 tvachim of width of the shulchan. So you do 2 tvachim on each side, so that that they should fit onto the shulchan. And you also have, since the length of the shulchan, according to him, was 12, and the width, he didn't change the width of the lechem, so there's going to be 2 tvachim extra. So he said that was in between the widths of the 2 lechems. There was a space in between on the shulchan, to allow air to circulate in between, keep it from getting moldy. Abba Shaul said, it sounds like he's saying that in that space they would put the bezichi levaina, shalechem aponim. Amr loy, they said back to him, should put on the seder, on the arrangement of the lechem, you should put the levaina. It should be on top. It sounds like it's saying it should go on top of the bread, not in the space in between the breads. Amalahem harik varnema va'olav mate menashe. It says legabe menashe that they were next to. They're saying how the machnas were. It says that Menashe was near Ephraim. It says olav, and olav doesn't mean that they camped on their heads. It means that they were nearby. So you see that the word olive doesn't necessarily mean on top. So Enochanami, he says, Abba Shaul will say that the bezichin were in between the orders, the sedarim of the bread. Va'arba snifin shel zov hayusham. We had this before. There were 4. It turns out I'm not exactly clear what they were, but they were supports. We've come across it before that were on the side of the shulchan. We saw one sheet that it was on the shulchan itself. There was a little bit of extra room. The other mandama says it went down to the floor. Mufutsalin, meroshein. They had pieces sticking out of them that they would put the half tubes, the kanim, onto them. That they would be supporting the lechem, and there were two on each by each one of the marachas, right? There were two piles of 6 lechem aponim. So two of these sniffin were for one seder and one was for the other, two of the other seder. V'chaf ches konim kechatzi kana cholul, and there were 28 of the reeds that we're going to see that were in between the 6 piled up lechem aponim. Arba asal l'seder zeh v'yudal l'seder zeh. 14 for each seder. It's obviously a strange number, 14. You think 6 would either be 18 with 3 for each, or even if you say, let's say the top ones will be 15. The Gemara is going to explain how we got to 14. Putting in these reeds is not doicha Shabbos. Either putting them in or taking them out. Ella nichnas me'erev Shabbos. They would put it in, and they'd go before Erev Shabbos, v'shaimtai. They'd pull it out from in between the chalis, and they would place it, I think, on the floor underneath the shulchan or next to it, and in the same direction. Why is that? Whatever was done in the Beis Hamikdash, all the kalim, if they had a long side and a short side, the length always went east to west, because that was the orientation of the Beis Hamikdash itself. In the Mishkan, its length was east to west. So when you put down these konim, they would also be placed east to west. The Gemara is going to address what was this process, what was the reason why it was taken out before Erev Shabbos and put back on after Shabbos. Look, the Gemara. Kol Menachos yesh bahen ma'isa kli mibifnim. We said all the Menachos were done bifnim. Sholos Rebbe Zuminai. And where does this come from? Amlam Arayu Oimer. V'Oimer Elai Zeh HaMakam Asher Yivshulu Sham HaKoyenim. As they changed it to Esa Asham V'Esa Chatas. Asher Yafu Esa Mincha L'Bilti Hoitzi Ala Chatzar Chitzayna. This is Yecheskel was being shown the bias shlishi, the bias of Asad Lava, and they showed him this is the place that the Kehanim are going to cook the meats from the Asham and the Chatas, and that's where they're going to bake the Mincha, because they're not taking it out to the Chatzar Chitzayna out of the Beis HaMikdash. Mincha Dom Yid Asham, and the Mincha, since we're mentioning the Asham and the Chatas, that their avodas are being done, they're eaten by the Kehanim in the Azara, it's Kachay Kachim. Ma Asham Chatas to Unim Kli, just like they are Kaddish in a Kli and they can't go out. Av Mincha Nami to Unim Kli. We learn from this pasuk that the Mincha also needs a Kli and it becomes Kaddish, and therefore the avodah of it has to be done in the Azar. Now we skip to the fun part of the Mishnah, right? All the numbers, the sizes of the shulchan, and the sizes of the lechem. So again, the shulchan was the lechem. Everyone agreed was 10 tvachim long. There were 12 loaves that were each 10 tvachim long and 5 tvachim wide. And there was a machlokes about the size of the shulchan. Everyone agreed also that the lechem was placed crosswise; its length was placed against the width of the shulchan. But one man Amr said that the shulchan was 6 wide, and therefore you only bent up a total of 4 tfachim from each challah, 2 on each side. The other man Amr said that the shulchan was 5 wide, and therefore you bent up 2.5 for each challah. And then you had piles of 6, one on top of each other. So shulchan archu asara. Amr of Yechanan. L'divrei oimer tfachayim u'mechza kaifel. Quinton man Amr that it was 2.5, meaning that the whole shulchan was only 5 wide, so that you had to bend up the challah 2.5 on each side. Nimtza shulchan v'kadosh chamisha asa tvachim l'maylo. The shulchan, we had this before. The shulchan is able, if you put something inside that airspace up to 15 tvachim, it's mekadosh. L'divrei oimer tfachayim. Quinton man Amr that it was 2 tvachim kaifel. Nimtza shulchan mekadosh yud beis tvachim. It only goes up 12 tvachim. That's how high the lechem is, and that's how high it's mekadosh. L'maylo. Fact the Gemara, how could Rabbi Yochanan say this? As a rule, for ikka konim, what about the tubes that were placed into the chalas? That took up a little bit of space, so that should expand the area where the chalas were and the areas that's kaddish. So the Gemara, konim shaklu mishakalahu. The konim were embedded into the chalas. they would, I guess, either push them into the chalas, or their weight would bend them down. So they weren't visible. In fact, my timer, mishum afushe, mishum afushe lechem. The whole reason for these kanim was to provide airspace, so the lechem wouldn't get moldy from being crushed together. Saif saif kamiyafish lechem. If the kanim are crushed and they're not visible, they're not, the lechem is all one on top of each other, so it's still going to get moldy the same way as if they weren't there. What are they accomplishing, right? And we said they're even like half tubes, so let some more air circulate in between. But if they're crushed under the chalas between two chalas, what are they doing? Zakt Gemara. So lechem the migvele zakt Gemara the migvele porta. No, einachanami. It's not one lechem right on top of each other. It leaves a little bit of space between the lechem. In fact, Gemara vayikahu porta. So if there's a little space, then it's more than 12 or 15 tefachim. So we're back to the original kasha. So what kivin delay havi tefach lechashavle. We don't less than a tefach. Well, we're not counting. It's not an amount that you could use. I don't know. Either it means that we don't count it. It could be Makadish a little more. I guess it means that it's Makadish a little more, but it's not relevant. We're not going to mention it. In fact, what about the bazichin that went on top of the lechem? Right? Not like the Mandama before, who said it was in between. But according to the Mandama that said it was on top, why isn't that also Makadish? The Gavya de lechem have a yasvi. Ulubahadi lechem have a kaimi. They were inside the depth, inside the receptacle of the lechem, right? The lechem bent over, so they were inside of it. In fact, what about those horns that we said of 7, or I think, what do we say? They were 4 tvachim, I think, of the lechem upon him. Those were also sticking up. Why don't we count that as well? So the kronos did not go up; they also went into the airspace of the lechem. The Gemara keeps imagining the what do you call it? The teva prutza, not the svina rekuda. So it was bending into the inside of it, so it wasn't going up. The lechem alayu nachle, and the lechem just went on top of the other lechem. It wasn't done. It didn't touch the kronos. In fact, the Gemara va'ikamaskartoi. There was a, if you all would have gotten this book that I keep on my desk, could have the picture. There was a trim, a piece of a 1 tefach wide mesgeres, I don't know what to call it, like a belt that went around the shulchan. So l'chayra, that makes it. The Gemara is imagining at this point that frame was over the table, the actual surface of the table, and the lechem had to be on top of it. It was a 1 tefach wide, and like we said, the lechem went all the way to the edge of the table, so it would be on top of that frame. So this is going according to the Manda Amar, that the misgeres was not on the surface of the table, but was underneath the surface of the table. And according to the Manda Amar, you could even say according to the Manda Amar that was on top. This trim, or this belt, was not over the surface of the table, but rather it stuck out. It was like a wall, but it was outside of the table. It didn't take away from the surface area. So therefore, the lechem was not lifted on top of it. To the Tanya, like we see in the Brayso, snifin. He disagrees. He doesn't hold of these snifin, these supports, the 4 supports to hold up the lechem, but rather, he held that this mesgeres, that was like a belt around the bottom tefach, that's what held up the bread, even though it was only 1 tefach, and the snifin l'chayr went all the way up to the top. But he felt like Rabbi Yossi held that that was all it needed. It just needed a little help on the bottom, and that was enough to hold all of them up. Amru loy maskati lamata haisa, and they answered back to him that it was they disagree. They held that it was on bottom, so therefore they disagree with Rabbi Yossi. They hold it was sniffing, and that's what held it up because they couldn't hold it up. Amr of Yochanan L'divrei Omer Maskat. This is we're gonna go a little bit off on a tangent. What time is it? 9:48. What time do we start? We started at 9:10.
9:10.
Okay, we're for the last week when we're still a block behind. We'll stretch it a little. So we don't get robbed so often. We gotta get our money's worth when he comes. Amr of Yochanan L'divrei Omer Maskat Lamata Haisa. According to the man Amr that the mascaris was underneath. Tavla Hamsapechas Tmeya. That proves that a surface, a piece of wood that can be used on either side, it means a flat piece of wood, is tame. Then we don't know. If you hold that this miscaris was underneath and it was attached to the legs, so it wasn't attached to the surface of the table. The table was sort of free floating. It wasn't the surface of the table was free floating. It was a flat piece of wood. So this is a raya that even such a flat piece of pshute kliates that are usable on the surface is also matama. But if you say it was on top, so then it became a receptacle. That misgeris on top allowed it to hold things. So that's not a raya of this question of whether tablas apachas is tameya. That was another tibayach. The Gemara says, but l'chayra, you see from this that a shulchan is mekabel tumah. Why is that? But the Gemara says that shouldn't be the case. There should be something that disqualifies it from being mekabel tumah, regardless of this question of whether pshute kliates, that's a table, tabla misapachas, whether that's mekabel tumah. But as a different disqualification from mekabel tumah. It's a kliates that's not movable. It's not intended to move. It's intended to play and stay in one place. The shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash was went there and that was it. My time. And why is that the case? When the Torah discusses the tumah of eights, it says it has to be similar to a bag, a sack. Masak metalta molivarek, and just like a sack is something that can be moved, whether it's full or whether it's empty, it's something that's movable. It's used. It's mobile. I've called metalta molivarekan. So therefore, the shulchan should be excluded from becoming tummy. It's excluded from this reason. So Gemara shulchan nami metalta molivarekan. No, Gemara answers that to shulchan also is movable. Kederish lakish, like Rish Lakish is Damar Rish Lakish. Ma'idich siv ala shulchan hatar. This is where we get Bechlal, that the Shulchan, this whole discussion was gebayt on the fact that the Shulchan was able to become Tameh. Who told you that? So it comes on this pasuk. The pasuk says, Al Shulchan Atar, the Shulchan that was Tar Mechlal the Ika Tameh. And the fact that it was Tar, Vice says it was capable of becoming Tameh. So you see that the Shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash was something that was capable of becoming Tameh. Element Lamed, Shemagvina say Lo'il L'Regalim. So why? How is it not a Kli Asil Nachas, an immobile Kli? Because they used to pick it up to show it to the Eile Garlam. Marim boy lechem, they would show the lechem on it, the lechem that was on it, the lechem upon him. For Emlem rochi basam amakim. See how beloved you are by the Rebbeinu Shalom. How they beloved. Kedivri Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Dam Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Nes gadol nasa belechem upon him. There's a great nes with the lechem upon him. Silukai kesidurei. That when it was taken away, it was the same as when it was put down. Shenema losum lechem cham beyoim chalkai. To put warm bread on the day hilakhay, on the day that it's taken off. That means it was still warm when it was taken off as it was when it put down. Correct the Gemara. Why do you have to come on to this and say that it was not a kli asin lenachas? It was a flat kli of wood, but it wasn't asin lenachas because it was picked up. How do you know that? Maybe there's a different reason why it's makabel toma. Maybe it wasn't a kli eitz at all. The table in shum tzipui. The shulchan was covered. There was no wooden kli in the Beis Hamikdash. It was covered with gold. So let's say that the gold covering qualified it as a metal kli, which doesn't have to be a kli also. It doesn't make a difference if it's asal nachas or not. Miloitznan hashulchan v'hadolviki. A shulchan is a table, and a dulviki is like a leather covered type of side table. Shenivchasu that got smaller, so it's no longer a size to be able to be used to make a full meal on it, which is what the use of a table is. In order to be clean, it has to be useful. Oy shechipam b'shayish, or if it was covered with marble. Marble is a kind of stone, and stone does not become tamei. B'shayir behem makam hanachos kaisis, and either it was reduced, shenifchasu got smaller, but it's only left enough room to put cups on it, or the part that was not covered with marble only was left enough wood to be covered with kaisis, tmein, it still becomes tamei, according to the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda imamakam hanachos chatichas shayir in loy shayir lay. He says no, it's not enough to have just to put cups. You also have to have enough room to put food as well, in addition to the cups. So you see that something that is covered with metal gets a din. That it's be able to be makabel tuma. So if it would be fully covered with metal, it would certainly be treated as metal. Or just like you say over there, that if it's covered with marble, it's treated as stone and not makabel tuma. If it's covered with metal, it should be makabel tuma. Maybe this din that it gets treated as whatever is covering it, whatever is gilding the wood. That's only if it's attached to it, if it's nailed together. That's not true. If it's covered with metal that is attached or not attached, if it covers the edges, the rim, or if it doesn't cover the rim, what's going to be the din? Is it treated as the covering? In either case, it's always going to be treated as whatever is covering it. And if you'll say, no, maybe over here it's different, even though it's covered with gold, the eitz was a chashav eitz, it was cedar wood, which is very chashav, and maybe that doesn't become, it still retains its status as wood. He says that the din is treated as whatever's covering it by this cheap wood, this Chinese made wood, Chinese pine. It comes from somewhere that's not important. The chash of a kli masmes that's made with a fancy wood, chashivi v'loy bali doesn't come bottle what's on top. Shaper. So according to him, it makes sense. This had to be wood. You can bring a rayas about whether the wood tablus kliates becomes tummy. Tabla misapachas. Al b'yochel nomer kli masmes nami betule ma'ikol amemer. So no, there's a different reason. You don't have to come on to that. The covering is not relevant. Shani shulchan rachmana kari eitz. The Torah calls it eitz, and if it has the din of eitz. Shneimar hamizbeach eitz shalosh amas gavoya orchoi shtayim amas. The mizbeach was 3 amas, its height, and hamizbeach eitz shalosh amas gavoya. It was 3 amas high. Orchoi shtayim. Its length was 2 amas. Motzei loy. It had corners of orchoi v'kiroisav. Its length and its sides, eights. It was all made out of eights. Vayedaber Elai zeh hashulchan asher lefnei Hashem. And he said, "This is the shulchan that's in front of Hashem." In fact, the Gemara pasach mizbeach v'sayim b'shulchan. Beginning of the pasuk talks about the mizbeach, and then it ends with the shulchan. At the time, the mizbeach was at the Beis Hamikdash was standing. The mizbeach is mekaper on people. Now that the Beis Hamikdash is not kayim, the shulchan of a person is mechaper, and Rashi says, like on the first narrow line, shulchanam sha'adam kayim, the noisem prusel archim. The way a person is kaveya, the way he gets his kapara is by giving achnasas archim, by making a Shabbos suda, a Yom Tov suda, and inviting people. But it's a very true thing if you think about it. Our main avodah these days, the biggest chance we have to be kaveya, the way we do our Yiddishkeit is by the shulchan, by the Shabbos suda. Okay, I'm going to stop over here with that editorial comment.